Welcome to Coffee Break, where we invite you to walk on the path of self-discovery with us. If you're somebody who is searching for belonging and understands the power of connection, this podcast is for you. As we unravel our stories, we hope you'll find inspiration, connection, and perhaps a deeper understanding of your journey and self. So today we're going to be talking about isolation and loneliness and what has occurred for most of us since COVID. But before we do that, we'd like to tell you a little bit about ourselves. My name is Fatima, and I'm joined here with Liz and Grace. I'm a mother of 5. I have a background in education and as a business owner. And during COVID, I watched my kids go from having full lives, enjoying school, having a great group of friends, to things drastically changing when the world shut down. And during that time, my marriage ended. And shortly after COVID, I lost my oldest daughter in November 2022. All of those experiences together really compelled me to want to change how I was living and to live a more meaningful life. And that's how I came up with the business concept of the Nexus experience. And Nexus means connection. And so we're all about bringing together people who are good-hearted, who have growth mindset, who feel like they want to belong together in one space where we talk about the issues that we're all going through. And so I was blessed to meet Liz almost 2 years ago. We were at a nonprofit event, and she just came up to me, and we're both introverts, so that was shocking. I was a little suspicious at first, but we connected and we realized that we actually lived in the same neighborhood. We started doing things together because COVID had ended, but we weren't all outside yet. And as I shared with her my hopes and dreams for the Nexus experience, she said, hey, well, I asked her and she said, yeah, I'll hop on board. And we haven't stopped since. So Liz.
Thank you for that introduction to our friendship. My name is Liz. As Fatima mentioned, we met at a nonprofit event. And so my background is in working in all areas of nonprofit programs, fundraising, and community building. And the reason why I was at that event is because the focus was exactly that, to gather good-hearted people who were doing good work in the community. And so I suppose naturally that's how Fatima and I ended up there, because we were seeking to do good, and we are both growth-minded people. So I believe it was fate, even though it took me to push a little and step out of my comfort zone and introduce myself. But I feel that I recognized a light from her, and so that's how we've gathered here today to start this podcast, to shine that light and hopefully spread it to you who are listening out there. So, and we're here with Grace, who has been a longtime friend of mine. And we actually have known each other for a very long time, but did not become friends, close friends, until maybe 10 years of knowing each other before we really connected.
Yeah, that's true.
And then another 10 years.
Wait. Has it been that long? Hold on.
I think so. It's been that long.
In my mind, it's just stayed like 10 years.
No,
Has it been 20 years?
It's been 20 years.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, now we're having a breakdown in the intro.
I'm destabilized. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it has been a really long time. So I met Liz through church, and then I was able to meet Fatima through Liz. And now I'm here producing this podcast with you guys. And what's really interesting about our dynamic is that we're all three of us so different, and yet we find so much to connect on. Mm-hmm. You know, who would expect we're 2 Koreans and a Black woman of different ages, different backgrounds, different cultures, and yet we find so many similarities between us. So I'm really excited to discuss today adult friendships And I think it's really relevant to even the story of how the three of us met and how we started this whole journey.
And we also recognize that, especially after the pandemic, that many of us are struggling with building and maintaining our friendships as adults, and navigating the changes in dynamics in maybe your social circle throughout the pandemic and now post-pandemic.
Yeah, and it's been 4 years. It was, I guess, 2 years of the pandemic and then the 2 years afterwards, but it feels like it's been less than a year sometimes.
Right.
So much has happened, but I can remember clearly what life was like pre-pandemic. And so my life was very busy. I was traveling. I was focused on my business. I was married. My kids were doing well in school. They had a full schedule. And then, like I said, when I started, it was a complete halt. Everything stopped. And in that stopping, I started to realize that there was so much in my life I hadn't addressed and I had been ignoring or didn't even realize needed to be looked at. And so that time being in the home with my family was a major transformation. And at the time, I was hopeful, but I thought it was going to be something that was just going to be short and we'd go back to life as usual, better for it. It actually ended up being very painful, took a lot longer, and there was some collateral damage, I have to say. And so that's why I'm so invested now in really examining my life and talking to other people about when your life changes unexpectedly, so drastically, how do you pick up the pieces? And so that's what we're talking about today. We're going to really dig deep into the problem, but we also have some solutions. So we want you all to buckle in and hold on. So Grace, how was your life right before the pandemic and then throughout the pandemic?
I think for me, I was in a similar place as you where life was just go, go, go. And I was constantly juggling multiple roles, multiple jobs. And when COVID hit, everything came to a halt. And I had to really sit with myself for the first time. And it wasn't until a couple months into doing that I realized that I didn't know how to sit with myself. And I realized that I didn't know how to slow down and I didn't know how to pause. So in a way, although COVID was, I don't know why I can't stop thinking of the word destabilizing. I was going to say
Because it's the
destabilizing.
It's the perfect word.
So although COVID was destabilizing, I eventually got to a place where I found a lot of healing in it. And I think during that time, though, I realized a lot of people were really lonely. And I think we all, as a community, spent a lot of time just alone and being isolated. And I think even to this day, although it's been 4 years since that happened, it's still impacting people and still impacting the way that we socialize. And I think it's easy to kind of move on quickly because we're a society that moves really fast. But I think it's important to acknowledge the impact of what that time was for us.
And that it looked different for other people. Like I was at home with my kids who some of them were in college and they came back home. I know that for you, you had roommates. And so not everybody was isolated at home with no one. But sometimes being surrounded by people felt very lonely as well. So we understand that there was a spectrum of what people were dealing with at home. And so I'm really curious to know from you, Liz, what was going on with you during the pandemic?
I had moved to a new city and I was looking for a job. And in that process, the city shut down. And so I wasn't able to find a job. And I was living with strangers, and it was a very stressful living situation. And I was far from my family, who was also struggling at the time. So even though I wasn't physically alone, I did feel very isolated and lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And I just realized something as we were talking about COVID and where we were at the time. Actually, by the time this podcast comes out, it will be 2 weeks to a month to the day that the pandemic started, because most places started to shut down March 15th. So it's been 4 years,
Wow.
almost to the day. We did some research, and 60% of adults in the United States report feeling lonely. Young adults between the ages of 18 to 22, so Gen Z, are feeling the most lonely at 79%. Millennials, 71%. Gen X, that's my generation, 45%. And so a lot of us are just trudging along, putting one foot in front of the other, not realizing why we feel heavy and tired and not inspired. Is because social isolation is as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. Women are more likely to feel lonely than men, but men are less likely to discuss their feelings or their struggles. So this comes from a study by the Applied Behavior Analysis Therapy Services.
Yeah, so during the pandemic, people weren't able to gather in person. And as a result of that, we found ways to either cope or meet those needs of having that social bonding. And that was a lot of meeting online. We got used to working remotely, and that continued on into our life post pandemic. And that made a lot of job opportunities for a lot of people too. So there was a lot of positive that came out of that. However, the negative side to that was people started to feel that we can connect without meeting in person. So now we see a lot of lower attendance in gathering spaces, in religious communities, in just in-person events in general. I think we've gotten really used to staying behind a screen or staying at home, being used to being alone.
And we are sitting here, what we realized was we're feeling it, but we don't necessarily understand why we're feeling it. And that's why we wanted to lay it out for people that things have drastically changed, and give yourself permission to mourn where we were before. And some of you all might be celebrating because you found the secret sauce, you found the solution for your life. So we're not saying that everybody is experiencing loneliness and isolation. We're just saying that for those of us who went through that, it was a perilous journey, and we're still trying to figure it out. People are now turning their attention to their adult friendships. We realize that we have to be intentional. We have to cultivate them. It's not going to be something that naturally happens, because if you're working from home, you're not going to have the happy hour after work to go to. You don't have people to have lunch with. If you're not going to church every week like you're used to, or the mosque, then you've got to figure out a way to connect with your spiritual group of people. Everything takes a lot more effort. Most of my friends are empty nesters. And I have a daughter who's younger, and so I have adult children who have left the house, but I also have a school-age child. And so trying to find my way between those huge age gaps has been difficult. When you go through a divorce, sometimes you lose your friends because people don't want to choose sides. Another thing that happened with me with my adult friends is that once the COVID happened, and pandemic happened, they started to say, hey, if everything's changing, why won't I change? I want to move. I want to live somewhere else. One of my friends, she hadn't worked forever, and she decided, you know what? I want to take on a career. So she left the area. So some of my closest friends are no longer in this area. And so I now realize that I'm building on the friendships that I had, but I want people who are here in my local area that I can spend time with. So that's my focus right now.
For me, I'm very fortunate and grateful to have a very close inner circle of friends that are in close proximity to me physically. But something that I have been wanting to work on is nurturing friendships that are in this in-between space, or not in-between space, but rather that I have fewer touch points with, but it's still a very pleasant and just nurturing interaction and time spent with each other. I think, for example, like I've been trying to find more activities where I'm physically with a lot of other people and meeting different people, forming connections, and not having that expectation of having that connection to be something that's requiring like a deep level of my emotional or mental energy. just being okay with having friends where it doesn't have to be that deep. You're just sharing time together, enjoying doing something that you both are interested in is something that I've realized that I didn't have before the pandemic. And now post, realizing that a lot of the loneliness that I would feel in between meeting with my closest friends, that I had to fill, not avoid, but just fill that social connection with people. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something I want to mention here for our audience, that it's the realization that connection does matter, as Grace says. And I think before pandemic, I was so busy just living my life on autopilot. I had really deprioritized meaningful connection. And now that my life is different and I've prioritized meaning in my life and purpose, I realize that my friendships and my relationships are very important. And in order for me to feel happy and joyful and that I have people there with me, I have to depend on people, that there is a place for interdependency. And I think that's a realization for me. I'm not saying that's for everybody. So it's not just that people are isolated and lonely, but we're realizing that, hey, connection really does matter. Relationships really do matter. And there's work to be done, and it's not something that just organically happens anymore. Everything now we have to kind of like schedule and plan and be intentional.
Right. And I feel like people used to be a lot more engaged with their communities, and maybe some people still are, but at least for me, like I don't even talk to my neighbors, and I feel like that's an area that I could get better at, is engaging in the community that's directly around me. And yeah, I think people used to depend on each other a lot more, but that's something that we're lacking in our current society. And I think a lot of people feel that. Liz, you mentioned being okay with it not being deep, but just having those friends that you can really just enjoy each other's company. You know, there's the different levels of friendship, right? There's acquaintances. So these are the people that you find yourself in the same spaces with, like work or mutual friends. And then there's your friends who you share common interests with, and you might share like an activity or go to a club and you enjoy each other's time together. And then you have those 4 a.m. friends that you can just call up and you know you can count on them to be there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm in a place where I'm realizing that I'm very fortunate to have my 4 a.m. friends, but I am also more open these days to the friendships that are just more casual and that you can just enjoy each other's time or share an activity together. And I'm realizing that those relationships are just as important too.
I'm wondering, and I don't know, but I'm just thinking, we all said basically we're looking for acquaintances or people who we have the same interests with. And I'm wondering if it's because perhaps during COVID, we had so much focus on people that we could lock arms with and help us get through. I don't know. I'm wondering if that's what it is, because I don't remember during COVID thinking about people I can have fun with. It was more people I need to have a deep conversation, and and maybe because I was going through so much, I needed 4 a.m. friends a lot during that period and right after COVID. And now I'm emerging on the other side, and I have more of a capacity to think outside of not just these deep, confidential people that I support and they supported me during a rough time. I don't know. That's just curious. So we were talking about intentionality, and I read the book Becoming by Michelle Obama, and she said for 30 years she's been so intentional about her friendships. She's got a schedule, she's got plans, and she doesn't take it for granted that it's something that you have to prioritize like you prioritize anything else in your life. And so I think that's where I am now. I'm open to meeting new people and expanding my circle.
So you talked about your ideal friendship and what you're looking for. And I'm curious, as somebody who is Gen X, what would you say are the struggles to finding new friends, making new friends?
I think because my identity is as a Black Muslim woman, Gen Xer, it's not an easy pairing with other people. And so I don't meet a lot of people like me. And while I'm willing and open and excited about meeting different people, that just makes it a lot harder. And so I think it's just because of my background and my experiences are very diverse, I guess you can say, that makes it difficult. As I said earlier, and as you said, my kids, I have adult kids, so the women that I raise my kids with, my mom friends, we're done with that. And so I just think it's a natural part of life. Even without COVID, I feel like I would be going through this to some degree because there is a shift when you go from your children being your major social point to their social needs are no longer your priority. Then you have to figure out, okay, well, now what? That was my experience as a Gen X. Liz, what's your experience as a millennial? Do you all have the same? I'm sure it's different because there might be some transitional time, but it's not like you have, the whole empty nester thing that you're dealing with.
Right. I'm honestly struggling to speak for the overall experience of my entire generation because I feel that I have a lot of older friends. So that is a point that has been on my heart recently is, do I just have a natural tendency to get along with people who are much older than me? Or is there something that I specifically struggle with making friends with people who are closer to my age?
That's a great question.
And I have been actively putting myself in spaces where I am surrounded by people my age to kind of test this hypothesis theory, whatever. But
How's that going?
I realized there's a lot of points that I don't relate to people closer to my age. There are these values that don't align, that I feel like don't align. Just when I'm having conversation with them, it's hard to find that flow, and I find myself overthinking. Yeah, so that's something that I have been, now that I've moved back to Atlanta more recently, that's something that I'm working through.
As long as I've known you, you've always been just an old soul and just very mature and always seen ahead of your time. So do you think that as you get older, it's like the people that are your age are getting more relatable? Like it's getting better
Am I catching up?
to your age, your soul's age? But
I think so.
okay.
I do sense that a little bit. And I think something that helps me with this is actively seeking out activities or events that I'm interested in. And when I pursue that, it's more likely that I come across somebody who I can really vibe with or connect with. Because we share that same activity. It's not really about our ethnicity or, religious
Or
beliefs, age. And the connection is when it's first formed around that activity, I think, or that interest, it gives a good base to form a good friendship just from that. And if they really are a open-minded person, growth-minded person, that all of our differences are what makes the friendship interesting and more dynamic.
Yeah, so I think it's important to be vulnerable. And also sometimes, like Liz said, you need to take the first step in putting yourself out there to meet these people. Because sometimes the right people are out there for you, but if you're just at home, you're not going to meet anyone. And so something that comes to mind is when I was in high school. So the kids in my neighborhood, we all kind of knew each other because it was a small neighborhood. If somebody new moved into the neighborhood, everyone would know about it. And so there was this girl that moved into the neighborhood, and I decided to take the first step in welcoming her and also just opening that door to ask, like, do you want to be friends? And I think that act of vulnerability and that act of taking the first step really led to a really beautiful friendship at that time. And although life kind of took us in separate directions, I still look back on the conversations we had very fondly. And a lot of times we would get off the bus and we'd just walk laps around the neighborhood and just talk for hours about family, about God, about where we're at in lives, about our dreams. And so I think that just goes to show, you could be missing out on a whole relationship by not just taking that one action of like, hey, do you want to hang out? Because a lot of times people will be really open to it. So what I took away from that experience is to make new friends, you got to be vulnerable and you have to be a good listener. and believe that they like you until they give you good reason that they don't, and then approach that situation with courage.
You have a good point. It's so important to be vulnerable and to be a good listener. So one of the things we're doing with our podcast is we want to not just be in the bubble of what it is that we think and believe. We want to hear what other people are thinking and believing and feeling. And so we have something called Unfiltered, where we go out and we talk to people about what we're going to talk about on our podcast. So the other week we were out at a cafe minding our business, planning for the week, and this woman comes up to her. You're going to meet her in Unfiltered. And she just starts asking us questions. And we end up having a beautiful connection with her and her friend. And it was all about adult friendships and how over the last 2 years they've become so close and how they support each other and how they both realize that they need people. And it was basically reflecting the same journey that Liz and I are on. So I think that it's important for us to understand that, like you said, we need to assume that people like us and that they like us, not until proven guilty, right? Like you said,
right.
that they just like us and they're
Right.
looking for our energy. And so I guess that takes us into solutions. We've mentioned some, but we just want to make sure that you have a clear takeaway. And that is to be open to new experiences and people and to step out of your comfort zone. We're not going to find new people staying in our homes. Well, I guess if you game or you do a lot of stuff online, but that face-to-face true connection, we've got to step outside our doors. What else would you all say?
Yeah, I agree with all that. And going back to being vulnerable, I've given it a lot of thought of how is somebody vulnerable? And I feel like to be vulnerable, you have to believe that you're worthy and you are enough the way that you are. And also having the courage to show up and engage with someone, even at the risk of them rejecting you or, being hurt, being willing to engage anyways.
That vulnerability aspect is something that I've struggled with in making new friends because I have found it difficult to share even the most basic details about myself without feeling like I'm outing myself. So, for example, when I had moved to a new city, I didn't have an answer to what brought you to this city. I didn't have an answer that I could share that I was still feeling like I'm being honest, but that I wasn't oversharing too much detail about my life. So I think navigating through that and learning how to share things about myself and be vulnerable with people that I meet and figuring out how to do that without feeling like I'm oversharing or I'm going into the most private, darkest details of my life. I think that has been really helpful for me in forming new connections with people.
Why do you think that is that you felt like,
I was outing myself.
Yeah.
I think just growing up being a very private person and having that privacy be invaded and the impact that that had on me and my friendships or relationships had me very guarded. And so I felt like even sharing the smallest thing about me was giving
Too much information.
too much
Yeah.
or a reason for or a way for them to hurt me, giving the other person a way to hurt me. And so that was something that I really had to work on.
How did you unlearn that?
I think I'm still going through the process of unlearning that, but also recognizing that, again, every friendship that I form, connection that I make, it doesn't have to go that deep. So it's okay to just talk about how was your day. Like, it's okay to go through the small talk and just build a connection that way.
I can definitely relate what you're saying. For me, it's very hard to share about myself. And I think because I am an introvert and a private person, everything kind of matters. And I'm protective of my family. And so I don't feel I can be cavalier just sharing details of how I came to be who I am. But I also realize that that's also, as Brene Brown, the story that I'm telling myself. I think I put way too much emphasis and importance on keeping certain details to myself, because when I have shared them, I've noticed that it really has been a blessing on somebody's life. So the way I'm trying to move through being ultra private is to realize that God puts us in people's lives for a reason. And sometimes it's not even about me, it's about them and what they need to hear from me. And taking it off of myself and believing that God will protect me, and letting go of that story that if I give somebody details about me, they can use it against me in some way. Because usually when we have those rock hard trauma or survival techniques, it came from a place of fear and not a place of
Right.
fact or love. And so I can definitely say that when I'm able to lean into that vulnerability and let go of that story that I'm telling myself, it never ricochets, and I don't regret having conversations where I share myself with people.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've learned too, is that sometimes when you take that risk and you share something that you went through that was really difficult and really personal to you, I've found that sometimes it can open up a whole new layer of friendship with somebody, or they're going through something similar that you would have had no idea about if you didn't bring it up. And I feel like that first act of sharing your story with someone can lead to somebody else's healing journey.
So, another great solution or way that we can be a good friend really is to not only learn how to actively listen, and that comes with just having a natural curiosity for people. So, if you really care about people and their life story, their experience, you'll naturally want to ask questions. And so, tuning into their responses, asking follow up questions, and being present with them is such a great way to show that other person that you're open and that you care about them as a person.
One of the things that's really helped me is to trust in God and know that I'm not alone because I do have God. And so trusting in his timing and that he will put the right people at the right time in my life has made a huge difference for me, and that he wants the best for me. And so I wanted to definitely add that as something that's made a huge difference for me.
So, Grace, recently you told us of an experience where you went to a social event and that had a big impact on you. Can you go into kind of why it was a special experience?
Yeah, I actually got invited to go to this foodie event a couple weeks ago, and I actually wasn't going to go because that particular day I was really tired. I asked one of my really good friends if she would want to go with me, and last minute, because she was also like, yeah, I don't know. And last minute, she's like, yeah, okay, like, let's go. So we went, not knowing what to expect, and it actually turned out to be such a memorable experience. Everyone was just so warm and kind, and we all had that mutual interest of loving food and making content. So it was just a really interesting experience to meet so many other people with similar interests. And I happened to meet a couple, a young married couple. They had interest in video editing, in rock climbing, and in food. And I was like, how could all these things align? And they were in my age group. And that doesn't happen often. So we actually ended up connecting further than that, and we went rock climbing together, and they introduced me to some other new faces, and this led to multiple great experiences. And that was all just from that split-second decision to go out that night. But not just attend the event and sit there and eat my food and leave, but being willing to ask people questions. And like you said, Liz, be curious about the other people, and they really reciprocated that energy. I think for me, it was a great reminder of everything that we're talking about on how to make friends as an adult, and that people a lot of the times will be really warm and receptive if you take that first foot forward.
And I want to say, like we were talking about, to not make assumptions about how the other person is feeling about you, but really focusing on what kind of friend am I? And being curious about them. If we really focus on that, the rest, kind of the overthinking, the anxieties, the worrying about how they think about me, that kind of all fades into the background.
Yeah, so I love these solutions, and what we hope today as we sat here together is that we hope that you feel hopeful and encouraged. And we want you to try something out if you haven't done this in a long time. We want you to hold a conversation, not just say hi, but hold a conversation with someone new that you cross paths with regularly. So this is somebody you might see at work if you go out to work, a neighbor, if you take a yoga class. Just stop and have a chat, and you never know what can happen from there. And then we also wanted to give a suicide prevention number. If you're struggling in any way, you can go dial or text 988. And we also are looking to meet people who, like us, who are good-hearted and growth mindset. We'd love you to join our community on Facebook at The Nexus Experience. Thank you all for joining us on our first podcast. We have many more to come. And you don't want to miss our next episode where we're talking about another type of relationship that's on a lot of people's hearts and minds, and that's dating. Until then, we'd love to meet you on all things social media at The Nexus Experience.